Good evening, everyone. How are you doing tonight? Great. Well, welcome to the closing program for our Arts and Wellness Festival weekend. It has been an absolutely extraordinary 3 days filled with reflection, connection, and activities that have activated the entire campus. Today, we also celebrated the opening of the Alice Walton School of Medicine, which is a major milestone for this campus. So before we begin, I want to take a moment to thank everyone who made all of the rich programming over the weekend possible, beginning with our Arts and Wellness Festival sponsors, Procter & Gamble and Mercy. Please join me in thanking them for all their support that they gave. We're also deeply grateful for the ongoing sponsors of our Talks and Lectures program series, Cadillac of Bentonville, Andrea Albright and Patrick Bannon, the Stella Boyle Smith Trust, Kathy and Mike Maiden, Demara Teitzer, and Omer and Evan Tor. Please join me in thanking them for their support. And finally, one more person that we need to support. We're honored to have Arkansas PBS joining us to live stream tonight's program. We're thankful for their ongoing partnership in helping us share conversations like this with audiences across Arkansas and beyond, so please join me in thanking them. You'll also notice tonight there is a QR code that is going to be on screen throughout the talk. Feel free to scan it at any time. This is where you'll submit your questions, and at the end, we'll leave a little bit of time to address some of those that we've gathered from the audience. So tonight's conversation turns to a theme that resonates deeply within the larger wellness stories, the social and emotional health of boys and men. Across schools, workplaces, and communities, we're seeing rising rates of loneliness and disconnection, especially among young men. This discussion invites us to look closely at the reality, to imagine how education, creativity, and community can help rebuild a sense of belonging and purpose. Earlier today, right here in this very room, we hosted a statewide convening on wellness and education through our Windgate Educators program, and it brought together Arkansas teachers, counselors, and community leaders from across the areas who are doing this work every single day. The evening continues that dialogue, connecting the local efforts to a broader national perspective. Our speakers tonight have each devoted their careers to bridging research, policy, and community life, helping us think deeply about connection, purpose, and well-being in a changing world. Richard Reeves is a writer, scholar, and founder of the American Institute of Boys and Men. His book, Of Boys and Men, Why the Modern Male is Struggling, Why It Matters, and What to Do About It, has sparked vital conversations around the globe about education, fatherhood, and opportunity. A senior fellow at the Brookings Institution and one of Politico's top 25 thinkers in America, Richard's work explores how inequality, gender, and social policy intersect, and how we can create conditions for all people to thrive. Moderating tonight's discussion, we're honored to have Governor Asa Hutchinson, who served as the 46th governor of Arkansas, leading the state through a period of growth and education. His leadership helped expand computer science education, create new jobs, and strengthen Arkansas's position as a model for civic and economic vitality. A former U.S. attorney, congressman, and undersecretary of Homeland Security, Governor Hutchinson continues to champion the importance of public service, civility, and community. Please join me in welcoming both Governor Asa Hutchinson and Richard Reeves tonight.
Thank you. Let me tell you, I wasn't excited about tonight until I got the book. I got the book, and
Usually
I
the
started
other way
reading
around,
the book,
Governor.
and all of a sudden, all the questions came into my mind that I wanted to ask. So I want to thank Crystal Bridges Museum for hosting this, giving us the opportunity to talk about one of the most important topics, I think, that for social well-being. Richard, welcome to Arkansas. I know you've got a little bit of a Eastern accent, way Eastern, but he lives in Tennessee now. Don't hold that against him. But Richard, welcome, and I want to get straight to it. And you're an author, and you started out writing a biography on John Stuart Mills, who is an economist, and you went from that book, a biography, to wind up with Of Boys and Men. How did that journey take place? How did you get here?
Thank you. Well, let me add my thanks, and it was a great honor to be in conversation with you, Governor, and also for the opening question to refer to my biography of a little-known 19th century British philosopher. So I want to thank you for that. I think if two of you buy the book as a result of that, then my sales will triple. If that's possible. So thank you for that. And also, just as you've identified, I do have a slight accent, so I want to apologize for that. I am a British American now. I want to just say by way of introduction that whilst I was born in the UK, I have an American wife, moved to the US in 2012. In 2016, I became a US citizen. I actually love this country, and I want to thank you for having me. I don't think that people who are born here perhaps appreciate the grandeur and the importance of what it means to be a citizen of this great nation. And so from the bottom of my heart, thank you. Thank you for allowing me to join the American family. And one of my unrelated policy suggestions is that every high schooler should go to a naturalization ceremony because they are beautiful and important, and I think maybe people don't appreciate it. The short answer is that, like, Mill's basic philosophy was that in a liberal, small L, liberal, free society, we should be clearing away barriers to human flourishing. He wouldn't have used the word wellness in the middle of the 19th century. He would have used different words around probably around flourishing and freedom. And so I think my career has, in one way or another, been devoted to trying to identify and remove barriers to human flourishing. And right now I see many barriers and challenges to the flourishing of our boys and young men, especially in our society. And so that is now my calling and my work.
So I can't help but reflect on what you said. I've tried to work with some publishers. They're difficult. But you told me that you could not get a major publisher to publish this book. And then it winds up being a national bestseller, President Obama recommending it, extraordinary reception out there. Publishers got it wrong, but tell me about that experience.
It was a bruising experience. I was, as you say, turned down by every publisher. The Brookings Institution Press came to my rescue, and I'm very pleased that they published it. And to some extent, the rest is a little bit of publishing history. But what's important about that was in 2021, is that just the reason why publishers wouldn't pick it up was because they thought that even a book as boring as this one, and let me reassure you that it is quite boring. I know that that's not really what the booksellers want me to say right now, but it's full of charts and data and like very careful analysis. Even given that, a book that was advocating for doing more on behalf of boys and men was somehow seen as an attack on women, as if we can't do two things at once, as if we can't simultaneously say there's a lot to do for women and girls, but by the way, there's a bunch of stuff which we'll probably get to, which I think if you're willing to ignore some of the hard facts about what's happening with boys and men, I think that's pretty unconscionable, frankly. But nonetheless, that was the warning I got, which is don't go near this issue. This is going to be seen as a reactionary anti-women tract, and so that was why they wouldn't publish it.
Well, I'm going to give you a chance to make your case because, you know, through my public career in Congress and as governor, you know, we were engaged with advancing women, STEM education, trying to increase the number of women with opportunities there. In my cabinet, in my workforce, you know, trying to make sure women had opportunity. And all of a sudden, I get this, you know, shot out of the blue saying, hey, we need to focus some on boys and men. So make your case that there's a problem with boys and men and the opportunities or their engagement?
Yeah, so I come at this with a bit of tension, frankly, partly because of the experience I just described, but also because it is quite true that there are still many areas that we need to do more for women. And I think, Governor, that you led the way on many of these fronts in the attorney when you were working in terms of increasing the share of women. Did you say correctly there were no women in the AG's office when you took over?
Well, that was when I was United States Attorney. I hired the first female assistant U.S. attorney, but as governor, we actually wound up with a majority of my cabinet at one point was women.
Right.
Were women.
Right.
And so providing opportunities, and it was a specific goal to increase those opportunities in Arkansas.
And it still should be in some areas. Now, there are some areas where we should take a win, right? Where we've made huge progress now, and we've got close to, or in some cases, past gender equity. And other areas where there are big gaps the other way around. And, you know, so the things that led me to this were the facts that I kept stumbling across in my day job, and being a father. I have 3 sons all in their 20s now, and watching them navigate some of the difficult cultural terrain that I'm sure we'll get to. But just on the facts, like there's a bigger gender gap on college campuses today than there was in the early 70s, but it's the other way around. So men are further behind women today in college than women were behind men when we passed Title IX in 1971-72. That's a huge gender gap. That's 16 points. Our college campus is now about 60-40 female-male in public universities, right? I'm not saying it's for the same reason or with the same consequences, but I'm just saying that's a pretty big gap. And you see it in high school. You see it all the way through, massive gender gaps now where our boys and men are way behind. We've seen pretty close to stagnant wages for working class men in parts of the country. That's a huge problem. And perhaps most tragically of all, and I am going to talk a little bit about suicide, so just so everyone knows that's coming, we're losing 4 times as many boys and men to suicide as we are women and girls. Now, every loss of life is a tragedy, but a 4-fold difference in the risk is not something to skip over. And since 2010, the share of the rise in suicide rates among young men, and I speak as a father of young men, so under 30, has risen by 1/3 just since 2010.
What's the reason for that?
Before 2010, it was more middle-aged men, and we actually had a story about economic dislocation, what were called deaths of despair, which included loss of life from suicide. The honest answer, Governor, is when it comes to why we're losing so many young men, most tragically, and in the most extreme case to suicide, but in other cases, just we're losing them. A 10th of young men are not in work or college. We don't know. That's the honest answer, is we don't know. We don't really have a good theory. We can get into this. I can speculate that some of it is about isolation. Some of it is candidly about not feeling needed. So one of the best studies of loss of life from suicide looked at the words that men use to describe themselves before they take their own lives, or attempt to, but usually when the attempt is made, their life is lost. The 2 words those men most commonly used to describe themselves were useless and worthless. And if we create a society where anybody comes to believe that they are useless or worthless, then we have gone very badly wrong indeed. And right now, that seems to be predominantly men and increasingly young men. And we have got to do a better job of making them feel needed and wanted and useful and worthful.
So if you look at the community, if you look at our cultural messages, and if you look at parenting, I know that's a lot, but how do we show our boys and young men that they're not useless, and how do we give them value, and how do we raise them and encourage them?
Well, again, it is worth reiterating that we still need to do a lot more to uplift women and girls in many spaces. I'm not going to keep saying that, but I will say it one more time because it's important background to what I'm about to say, which is that we have to make sure that we're not just giving our boys and young men a long list of things not to be and not to do. Don't be toxic. Don't mansplain. Don't do this. Don't do that. Don't say that. Don't think that. Don't do that. Don't click on that. Don't. And no do's. No message to boys and young men about why we need them, why we especially need them, not despite the fact that they're male, but because they're male. And that lack of a positive message from parents sometimes, from schools, from institutions, has created a huge vacuum in our culture. I would say downstream, possibly in our politics as well, but I think I'm going to leave you to maybe talk about the political implications, Governor. But I do think it's created this search among many boys and young men for a sense of, well, what does it mean today to be good and to be a good man? And I'm afraid that we've just framed it too negatively. We've been too deficit-focused on it in recent years. And the term toxic masculinity, for example, which didn't exist before 2016 outside of the margins of academia, has done a huge amount of harm because it has framed it in such a negative way. And that's not to suggest there aren't real challenges that we need to face for both men and women. But I mean, as a dad, did I raise my boys to be non-toxic? Just think, my boys, one day you could be not poisonous. Imagine being non-toxic. That's not very inspiring, is it? And it's not how I raised my sons, and it's not how we should be treating our young men.
Charlie Kirk was murdered. It caught the nation's attention, the world's attention. I just came back from Oxford Union, where I debated, and Charlie Kirk was the last American debate there last year. And it's caused everybody to focus on him somewhat. Tell me whether he understood this, tapped into it, and how people responded to his message on the role of men in society.
Well, it's a couple of things I'll say. One is I'll just quote the New York Times columnist Ezra Klein when he said that Charlie Kirk was doing politics exactly the right way. Engaging with people that you disagree with. This is where John Stuart Mill comes back in, which is that Mill's view was that unless you're engaging with people that you disagree with in good faith, then you're not thinking at all. And so I think that the willingness of Charlie Kirk to do that was the first thing. The second thing is that because he had a very strong prescription, he had a positive story for young men about what they should do. Right? In his case, it was to go to church, work hard, get married. I'm sure he put it better than that. But he had this kind of script. And I think in a world where so many young men are searching for a script, because we've torn up the old one in many ways, and for understandable and mostly good reasons, but that does leave this hunger. And I think the clarity of his message about that, and about here's the call to you, and here's why we need you, is one of the reasons why he found such resonance among so many young men.
The disconnect that some boys and young men feel, how does that impact the role of faith and faith in trying to, or the role of the church in trying to make sure that every person believes that they have worth and dignity and a purpose in life?
It's just very interesting. I'll answer as a social scientist first, but there's some interesting data showing that there's been a turn back to church, especially among young men. And when that data first started coming in, I wasn't sure about it, to be honest, because you get these blips in the data and it can be noisy, but it looks real now. There's been enough data points to suggest that there is something of a turn back, and it may actually have something to do with Charlie Kirk, and I suspect that if anything that will accelerate in the wake of his murder, partly because of the way people are reacting to that. And the way I interpret that, and it comes back to your earlier question, is that there is a hunger among many young men for structure and purpose and meaning. And guess what? The churches have had quite a long history of providing structure and purpose and meaning and moral formation. And so the discipleship and the moral formation that churches could offer to young men could be very powerful. I think there's also a danger, however, and you're seeing this in some of the current debates within the evangelical church that you and I talked about a little bit before we came on stage, is that it can sometimes make what I would consider to be a reactionary turn, and in some ways make the fatal mistake of framing this, playing into this zero-sum game, that somehow the problems of men are the result of the rise of women, and the solution to the problems of men is to turn back the clocks on women. I think that is fatally mistaken. And so it's very important that as churches engage in this work, that they contribute to the distinct moral formation of young men without in any way turning them against the progress of women. That is a difficult thing to do, but the church has been doing difficult things for a long time.
It's somewhat like the race issues, that, if it's easy to blame another race because of their progress, that somehow it leaves everybody else out.
Or immigration.
Exactly.
It's zero-sum.
Yeah.
Yeah. Zero-sum thinking is the enemy of progress.
So if you look at solutions, first let's look at policy that should be looked at from the standpoint of governors, of policymakers. Or is there anything out there that we should be doing different from a government policy standpoint that might impact boys and men?
Sure. Oh, we're into policy. Thank goodness. This is my happy place, is policy. This is where things get really wonky. And when I said boring earlier, I just want to say that one of the mottos of my new think tank, the Institute, is keep it boring. In other words, get away from the kind of culture war froth as much as possible and get into actual policy solutions. And when my son overheard me saying that our motto was keep it boring, he instantly said, well, you're the man for that job, Dad. So I'll take it where you can from your kids. So I think there's a number of things at different levels, and I'm pleased now that a number of governors are really stepping up to this issue just in the last year or two. But let me start with the fact that male role models really matter. Boys are struggling in school. And we have seen a drop in the share of K-12 teachers who are male from 33% in the 80s to 23% today and falling. So it's a 10 percentage point drop. There are fewer men in teaching now than there are women in STEM, which is, I know, an area that you've done a lot of work on. So we've seen a huge increase in the share of women in traditionally male professions, but we've seen a massive decline in the share of men in our classrooms. And it seems to me that male teachers are coaches, a third of them are coaches. They are role models in front of the classroom. They're less likely to penalize male behavior. And I'm not saying anything bad about female teachers, by the way. I'm sure there are some female educators in the room. I don't want to be misunderstood here. I just think representation matters. And it matters both ways. And one of the things I'm most delighted about is that having struggled his way through high school, one of my own sons is now a fifth grade teacher in Baltimore City, Maryland. And I did say to him, I said, when you're a teacher, you have to go to school, right? Because that was a big problem for him when he was a student. And he teaches these fifth graders in Baltimore City. And one of the things he does is and I'm sharing this story with his permission. One of the things that he does is he lets some of the kids arm wrestle him. So they come up and they arm wrestle him. And if they beat him, they get out of having to do their homework assignment for that night, right? So that's the prize. And they all line up to kind of... And I said, well, how are you doing? And he says, well, so far I'm 1,327 for 0 because they're 11. And he's 6'4" athlete. And so he beats them. But every day they try, today I'm going to be the one to beat him. And I love that. And I'm going to risk saying that that's a certain kind of masculine energy. I'm not saying that a female teacher couldn't do that. I'm just saying that feels like something a male teacher would be more likely to do, and that's kind of awesome. And it's okay if female teachers are doing something different. But I'm tired of people saying we lack male role models and then not having a policy to increase the share of male teachers. Like, how can you sustain that? And then I won't, and I'll just very briefly say, because I spent more time on that one, but an area I know is of great interest to you, Governor, but more apprenticeships, more vocational training. It is very clear that's good for everybody. It's especially good for boys and young men. Technical high schools, apprenticeships, early apprenticeships, hands-on learning. It just skews very male in terms of its impact, and so I would be hugely investing in that.
Because they learn differently.
Yes. On average, yeah.
And so the young man in school, he wants to be practical. He wants to be able to get out there and work with his hands.
Well, yeah, I'd not just say work with his hands. I think it's, and again, these are all averages, of course, but boys and young men need to see the why of the learning before they'll engage with the what. It needs to be more applied. They need to see the point of it. Girls and young women, for whatever reason, just seem to be a little bit better at getting the work done, even when it appears pointless, right? And so the good news about this is that making it less pointless is particularly good for boys, but it's good for everybody, right? It's not bad for girls to see the point of what they're learning, but it seems to be particularly good for boys. So I'd say it's more about knowing the application of the learning. And then there are other issues too. So on average, boys are a little bit more drawn to competition. And so actually having a competitive element in it, as long as that's not the only way you do it. I'd say in education generally, the challenge is to not end up treating boys like malfunctioning girls. And if you have a default assumption about how a student should behave, which is how long they can sit still, how willing they are to do abstract learning, which seems pointless to them, how obedient they are, etc. If you just, how physically active they are, etc. If that default student in your mind is a girl, on average, then your policies and your culture is going to inadvertently disadvantage boys. And so that's why the school system has ended up being less boy-friendly than it is girl-friendly on average, because we do have the default, and we do end up treating boys like malfunctioning girls, which is one of the reasons why we see massive overdiagnosis, for example, of things like attention deficit disorder, because the boys are behaving differently to the girls, and we pathologize that, and then medicalize it, and then prescribe for it.
So I learned a new term in going through the book of Boys and Men, and that is HEAL. So we talk about STEM education, science, technology, and math, but how about HEAL, which I believe is, will you tell me what HEAL is?
Yes, health, education, administration, and then literacy.
And so how are boys doing in those fields?
Well, they are declining in their share of the occupations, for sure. So there's a labor market answer to this, which is, so I've already talked about education, the massive decline in the share of male teachers, but we're also seeing it in healthcare. So a massive decline, particularly in mental health. So if you just take two professions that I think really matter, psychology and social work, they used to be about 50-50. Male, female, if we go back to the 70s, they're now 20% male and falling. And so we're cratering the share of men in our mental health professions, just as I think we need more representation in them. So healthcare, education are just areas where there's just fewer and fewer men. And I do believe that that's a missed opportunity for the men, because there are jobs in healthcare in particular. Right? We have a huge need for workers in healthcare. I think it's a huge miss for the users of the healthcare system. I think it's good to have some men around in hospitals and care homes as well as in schools. Frankly, I don't think those should be all female workforces any more than we would. I don't think we would countenance it the other way around. And by the way, I'll risk saying, I think it'd be an outcry if these professions were becoming all male. Right? I think we'd be reading about it almost every day, but we don't read about it when it goes the other way. So I think it really, really matters to get more men into those professions, and that should be something we can all get behind, because it breaks down some of the gender stereotypes. Now, I don't think we'll get to 50-50 in all these professions, because there are, in fact, some differences between men and women in their preferences. But nonetheless, we can do better than we currently are. So currently, the share of men, the share of early years educators that are male is between 2 and 3%, depending on how you measure it, right? That is half the share of fighter pilots who are women. So we have twice as many women flying fighter jets as a share of the occupation as we do men teaching early years education. I don't think that's good, and I think we can do a lot better.
This is a question that I probably shouldn't ask, but it came to my mind. I'm going to ask it anyway. What impact does the women moving into the martial arts, the tough sports, and you also see them in the movie screen being the baddest, karate chopper in the world. I mean, that's a new phenomenon on the movie screens and what we're seeing promoted in the arts and entertainment. Does that have any impact on our discussion?
Yeah. Well, you definitely shouldn't have asked that. And I definitely shouldn't answer it. But fortunately, it's just us and the good people in this room and everybody watching on PBS. Yeah, look, I think what's happened is that we've just gone too far in some of this cultural messaging. There's been a lag. And so it was absolutely necessary, I think, to shift some of those cultural depictions of like who could be a hero, who could save the day, etc., away from some of those stereotypes that we had before. But we've got to a point now where, I mean, there's a whole bunch of young men, including their own sons, just won't watch half of the things coming out of Hollywood because they know what's coming. And what's coming is a morality tale in which the woman teaches the man to be less toxic while she karate chops all the bad guys much better than he ever could, right? And it's just boring at this point, and it's preachy, and they can see it coming. And so unfortunately, what I think has happened is that Hollywood and that culture is still a little bit behind the times. They're just not quite getting the fact that we do want gender equality. We do want women to have the same opportunities as men in the way that you've shown in your own career, Governor. But we don't have to do that by somehow saying there's something wrong with men. And I said earlier that we shouldn't treat boys like malfunctioning girls. We also shouldn't say that, like, men are only good to the extent that they embrace their feminine side and discard, like a kind of used, like the appendix. Masculinity is not like the appendix that we can just do without. But there is a sort of feeling about that, is that in order for men to embrace the opportunities of women, they have to somehow turn away from being men. And I think that's been a profound wrong turn.
I'm sure glad I asked that question.
Let's see how the reactions are online, shall we?
So we have obviously parents and grandparents in here, and we're all dealing with young boys and raising them. So what advice is there for parents dealing with the challenges of this age and the challenge that boys and men face?
Well, I guess the first thing would be don't panic. I think that we're going in the right direction on this issue, and boys and young men are awesome. And if you have sons, how lucky you are. I cannot tell you how happy I am to have 3 sons. I had a father whose love I never doubted, and I just hope to have given 50% of that confidence and love to my 3 boys, who are very different and who I completely adore. They are awesome, and it's great to have sons, and it's great to be a dad. And so don't panic. Don't panic about the online world as much as some people would have you panic. I'm not suggesting that there aren't dangers online, but right now there's a bit of a tendency, I think, to immediately pathologize anything online that men are doing, right? And we have to be careful about that. So it's important to watch that and be sensible about that, but there's something of a moral panic now about the online lives of boys and men that is not, in my view, fully supported by the data. So I'll give you one example around gaming. Like most of the evidence around gaming is pretty positive. Right, I'm just going to say that. I'm happy to say more about that. But but there's a moral panic.
Say that again.
Gaming, like video games.
It's healthy.
There's more positive evidence coming in than negative evidence. Boys, they enjoy it. They make friends through it. They get purpose through it. They get structure through it. The problem is if they're not doing other things as well. The problem is if it displaces other activities. But there's nothing wrong in and of itself with gaming. Right, with games, it's fun. I watch my own sons or listen to them laughing and playing and staying in touch with each other. And they know stuff about each other's lives. And I'm like, how do you know that? Because you live hundreds of miles, thousands of miles away from each other. So, we were on Discord the other day while we were playing Rainbow Six Siege and we mentioned it. So they're talking. One of the things we know about the differences between men and women is that men communicate a little bit more comfortably shoulder to shoulder rather than face to face. Does anyone, have you heard of this? It's really interesting. People have now got, people have done whole PhD theses on the way that men stand in relation to each other. And once you've seen it, you won't be able to unsee it. So if you're at a social event, like look at the way that the men are standing, right? And would you mind joining me? So like men don't stand like this, right? We all stand like a bit like that, right? And we'll chat like this, right? We're chatting, right? Now, that's just a fact, right? And people have measured the angles and stuff. And men seem to be more comfortable talking to each other shoulder to shoulder. So that's why the car ride is important. That's why fishing is important. It's the only explanation I've ever found for the existence of golf, right? Is that, and I'm the same on road trips, just a bit more comfortable, whereas women are much more comfortable face to face. And there's our cortisol level spikes, and there's just a difference in our communication style. Psychotherapists will say, last thing you want to do with a young man is sit him down and stare him in the face and ask him what's wrong with him. Take him for a walk. And gaming is another version of that. It's virtually shoulder to shoulder, but you're doing something whilst communicating. And so we shouldn't shut down what is one of the most important forms of communication and connection that young men have, just because it's quotes online. We have to be much more subtle about that. And so don't panic around that. And then the last thing I'll say, and it's a bit of a repeat of the earlier point about malfunctioning, is don't think of your son as a malfunctioning daughter. You know how parents will sometimes think, why can't you be more like your sister? Right? They may not say that. I hope they don't say that. But they sometimes think it. And I'll be completely honest, I used to think it. I used to find myself saying, why can't you be more like your sister? And my sons didn't have a sister. I made one up. I had an imaginary daughter who I could compare them to. And she, in my imagination, she always knew things like, you need both shoes on to go to school. And so even then, I was kind of holding them to this kind of implied feminine default and kind of holding them up against it. I strongly recommend a book called Boy Mom by a writer called Ruth Whitman, where she kind of talks about the shock of actually the fact that boys are different. And they're not better, they're not worse, but they are different, and we should glory in that difference.
So my wife Susan is here, and she'll tell you that I was an absent father on a number of occasions, actually, when you gave birth to, I think, one or more of our children. Now,
you should know that, Governor, just to be clear.
Yeah, since I've got, I've made up for it in a lot of different ways, and but my point is, of course, that you've made some comments about men as parents, and the role that they play in raising children, or so comment a little bit on where you see that can be strengthened.
Yeah, this is really something that's developed even since I finished the book, is a growing sense of the importance of fatherhood and of father figures by extension. This old trope that it takes a village. That's true to raise a child, but some of the villagers have to be men. And in particular, have to be dads. I've come to think that fatherhood is a load-bearing wall for a good society, and that a society that doesn't have strong fathers, wherever possible, is going to be in trouble. Their kids are going to struggle, their sons and their daughters are going to struggle. And so it seems to me that the answer to many of the questions that I've been asking lies in the rejuvenation of fatherhood as not better than, but also not worse than motherhood, but somewhat different. So a lot of what we do as parents is similar, right? There's no feminine mystique to changing a diaper, much though some men might try to pretend that there is, right? A lot of what we do is the same, but some of what we do is different. And dads in particular seem to be quite good at helping children and young adults learn to take risks appropriately, to get out into the world, to explore. And that seems to be as true of girls as it is of boys. And in particular, they also model relationships that they want their sons and daughters to follow. So I was very struck by a finding recently that two things have struck me recently. One, that the mental health of women at the age of about 30 is quite strongly predicted by their relationship with their father when they were 16. So if you're a 16-year-old girl and you have a good relationship with your dad, that seems to set you up well for life. I think that's intuitive. I think that what's happening there is just that sense of yourself, the sense of your father's love, and maybe some modeling is hugely important. And the other thing I've learned is that, have you heard of oxytocin, the love hormone? So women get flooded with this love hormone when they give birth. Obviously you weren't there to witness this, but and when they breastfeed, and when they hold their babies close. And so this hormone floods the body, and it's the bonding hormone. Something similar happens when we fall in love. But we've discovered recently that men also get a spike in that hormone when they interact with their kids. But it's obviously not from giving birth to them or breastfeeding them or even from holding them. Can you guess what it is? What do you think gave you an oxytocin spike, this love hormone spike with your kids?
I give up.
Playing. So the best evidence is throwing your kid in the air and catching them, right? I bet you did that, right? Yeah. Hands up. Are there dads in the room? Hands up if you're a dad. Hands up if keep your hand up if you've thrown your kid in the air and caught them. Yep, that's what I thought. By the way, the catching them is an equally important part of it. And there's this fantastic meme online where it shows you a dad throwing his kid in the air, and it says, and it's from the dad's point of view, right? And it's like about 6 inches. From the kid's point of view, and it feels like about 2 feet or something like that. And then it's from the mum's point of view, and it's like 3 feet up in the air, and her job is to say, be careful, be careful. I spoke to a friend about this last night, and he said that his wife would say, mind the fan, right, when he was throwing his kid up in the air. And he's like, the fan is in the other room. But the point is, we get a spike from that. So we get a similar bonding hormone spike from that, but from different activities. And I think that's a beautiful difference, because what it tells us is mums and dads are bringing something different to the party, and we cannot bench our dads.
And so one of the things that you advocate would be 6 months of paid leave for dads to stay home as well.
Right. Yes. Yes, so 6 months for mums and 6 months for dads. And as anybody who's in the policy world will know, someone said to me, are you close to full pay as well? I said, 6 months of paid leave? What are you, European? I said, well, actually, I am. And so it seems crazy, but since I published the book, the US military introduced 3 months of paid leave for both mothers and fathers independently. And so it sort of feels to me like maybe it shouldn't, maybe civilians could benefit from that too. But the key point is that actually for dads to have some time off, and it doesn't have to be early, it doesn't have to be around the birth, it could be at different times. But I think the signal from public policy, whatever the paid leave policy is, should be that dads matter as much as mums. And we cannot continue to wag our finger at dads and talk about fatherlessness and deadbeat dads or whatever, when our public policies continue to send the message that dads do matter less than mums. And so it's time to change that.
We need questions from the audience. I hope you all have submitted those, and I'm confused on the time as to when we need to start that. Do we have any questions yet?
We do. We have some great questions from the audience. The first one is, digital life offers both community and disconnection for young men today. What can we do, especially as AI becomes more influential, to help ensure those online spaces foster belonging and growth rather than isolation?
Well, I think there are certain things we can do, and here I'm just going to some extent channel my friend, and he's chair of our advisory council, Jonathan Haidt, which is be much more serious about age verification, to have norms around access. So some of it is honestly about making sure it doesn't soak up too much time in boys' lives. And I mentioned the kind of positive value of gaming. I think that's important. There are certain things we can do online, and I would recommend to parents and others to just try and engage with their son's online life, so you understand it, so it's not just this weird thing they're doing over there, right? Because even talking about online is kind of weird, right? Given that's where so much of our lives happens now. I think that for old people, we kind of see this distinction between the real world and online in a way that just, that line's just so blurry for others. But my main point would be we do need to make the in real life alternatives much better. I mean, honestly, these games are amazing. And they can be highly connective, and they can be fun, but they can also be isolating if they are instead of in real life. But As we discussed even before we came on stage, I think that the fact we've kind of emptied out many of the other alternatives for boys and young men, like the fact that Boy Scouts doesn't exist anymore, is now Scouting America and going co-ed. And I could repeat a number of organizations that's happened to, fewer boys playing sport. We have to massively invest now in spaces and places for boys in the real world. It is no good us just saying, why are you spending all your time online, when frankly the alternatives kind of suck or don't exist. And so it's incumbent on us to create better alternatives to online life, rather than just try and solve the problem online. We have to solve it in real life.
Thank you. Our next question, when new programs focus on supporting boys and men, how can leaders make sure those efforts complement ongoing work to uplift groups who have historically felt overlooked or underrepresented? How can we continue to reinforce that progress is not a zero-sum game?
Oh, no, these are questions directed to you.
Yeah, okay. All right. Because you did a lot, as I mentioned earlier, on behalf of women and girls. Do you look back and see that you could have done more for boys and men? This is really unfair. I'm turning the mic on you, but
no, I don't. I think we had obviously that was a need in the STEM fields. I think the point being that we need more male teachers. Absolutely, I agree with that. And policymakers ought to be looking at how can we encourage and make sure you can make a living teaching and provide for the family, just like a woman teacher needs to have that same income. So we need to look at policies that will encourage that. So I don't think we did it wrong. I think it's just a more complete picture. Yeah. And I also would add that, one of the things that you talk about dads being in the home and dads being engaged in raising children, this, of course, has been a long challenge for some black families and that minority, and we focused on that. There's a lot of nonprofit organizations that support that. So to me, you focus where there's a problem. That's what policy leaders do. You identify problems. That's what you do, and we need to address it.
Yeah, so you should be led by the data, I think, is exactly the spirit that you've governed with. And just to take a specific example, the short answer is do both, continue to do both, but be led by the data. So you might get to a point where you say, actually, we don't need extraordinary efforts anymore to increase the share of women in the legal profession, for example, because women now account for more than half of the people entering the legal profession, right? But we may need to do more on getting more men into teaching, right? And there are some areas of STEM, like tech, for example, still has massive female underrepresentation. We have to do much more on that. So it is to be able to do both and just not allow the zero-sum thinking to creep in. I really worry that too many people on the left think doing stuff for women and girls means you can't do stuff for boys and men. But frankly, I think sometimes on the reactionary right, and I'm making an important distinction there is this sort of sense of like, yeah, we need to go back on all this stuff that women have taken stuff from men, and that's just categorically untrue as well.
Thank you. Our next question, is this trend only in the United States, or is the same trend happening in UK and Europe?
Yeah, I can answer for the UK for sure. I've actually helped set up a new think tank in the UK on this issue, and I'm very pleased to say that the UK government is about to produce its first ever men's health strategy for England. That is a first, and that we've been helping to support around that. Because some of the data on health, I shared a little bit of it, but there's a 5-year gap in life expectancy and growing in the US. Among the top 15 causes of death in the US, 13 have a higher rate for men than women. So 13 out of 15 of the top causes of death. It's worse for men. And so men's health is a huge important issue. And I should, by way of explanation, and my wife urged me to explain this, which is it's November. But of course, for some of us, it's Movember. So if you don't know about this, there is a men's health charity called Movember, which encourages men to grow facial hair or a mustache or a beard during November and raise money. So I have a Movember page where I'm trying to raise $1,000 to support in men's health through Movember, and that's why I look like I haven't shaved for a couple of days, because I haven't. So I just want you all to know. My wife said you look like an alcoholic.
Well,
but it's for a good cause, I promise.
In Arkansas in November, we grow beers for deer season, for deer hunting.
I feel like we could put those two together into a really powerful combination, the Arkansas Movember. Yeah.
Thank you. Next question. What would it take at the policy or community level to make teaching and healthcare more appealing and supported career paths for men?
You know, that's, I think pay is one thing, but pay is cross-gender, so you really can't just point it at that. I think it's the reward and it's the public image. And so, you know, in Arkansas, we wanted...
In a way that is just more male-friendly, and I think we should absolutely do that. I mean, the work on women in STEM was very good at saying, look, are we sending a message about what these STEM professions are like that looks male, right? If you only see men in the advertisements, if it kind of codes male, if the language is very male, if it's described in very male terms, don't be surprised if women don't apply. Well, we do all of that with these other professions the other way around. And so we've got to find ways to make it feel like it's a profession that will appeal to men, not, as I said earlier, despite them being men, but because they are. So for example, in teaching, I think we should be exploring ideas like teacher-coach models. I mentioned earlier that male teachers are much more likely to be coaches. How about we create a system whereby you're a teacher and a coach, and we pay you, more for doing that, right? And you have to work a longer day because you're going to coach every day, etc. But how could you rebrand one of the educational pathways as being around coaching, right? I think that would be a really powerful way to potentially draw more men in, but it requires the policymaker to see the lack of men as a problem in the first place, which increasingly they are, in order to design those sorts of policies to actually draw them in.
So related to that is service. And as I mentioned to you, I've been promoting national service, volunteerism through state initiatives where you can have it's not just a matter of going to the military, but you could be in AmeriCorps, or you could be volunteering for nonprofit organizations, take a gap year from college, or do it after high school, and try to encourage the spirit of volunteerism. How is there a difference between men and women in this regard, in volunteerism, and is this part of the solutions for the future?
Yeah, there's actually a huge gap in volunteering between men and women. So if you take AmeriCorps, Teach for AmeriCorps, Teach for America, the Peace Corps, Big Brothers Big Sisters, YMCA, they're all running at about twice as many women volunteering as men. And if you take Big Brothers Big Sisters, they have a huge waiting list for boys in most areas of the country because they don't have enough men signing up to be mentors. And so the governor of California recently issued a call to men, trying to get 10,000 more men into service. And it turns out that actually, if we just ask for volunteers, we don't get men. And we could argue about that for a long time as to why that is, but it does seem to be true. We need to call to men. We need to say we need men in these service opportunities, in these organizations. We have to ask them to come as men. And I do think that in some ways, the idea of service and a kind of service-led masculinity is the answer to the question a lot of people are trying to ask now, which is you give more of yourself than you get. And I really worry that so many men in their 20s and 30s aren't hearing the message that we need them to go into their local scout group or their church group or their Big Brothers, Big Sisters or boy clubs, because by God, we're desperate for men in those places. And many of those men probably want opportunities to serve. We've lost the idea, I think, of service as incredibly important, particularly to young men.
It gives you self-worth. It gives you the satisfaction of serving others. So there's a lot of value there. I do think it is important to have a stipend for those young men and women that would take a year out and serve their community. So that's a concept that I hope that can gain initiative.
I completely agree.
From the audience, any other questions?
I think that's all we have time for today, but thank you so much.
Let me come back to you for Richard, a final word. First of all, this has been illuminating to me and invigorating, and I hope it's been helpful to everyone in the audience. Give us a word of hope for the future, and are we making any progress? And give us your final comments.
Well, I also I want to say thank you again to everybody who's coming, but also to you, Governor. It's been a real honor to share the stage with you, and I want to thank you on behalf of everybody here, but also of my new nation for your service to this state and to this country. I think you have modeled a service-led vision of masculinity, if I may risk saying that. And I'll just say that one of the things that gives me hope is that we're having conversations like this in rooms like this, in what I think is a good faith way. Everyone's not agreeing with each other, and I hope that lots of conversations will happen after this tonight. But the thing that gives me hope is that I see in young men, especially, a genuine curiosity and a hunger to find their way in the world. It is confusing right now, but whenever I actually kind of engage with young men, they are mostly totally awesome, and I just want to say to the young men in this room, and all men, you're awesome. I also want to say to the older men in this room, there is a young man in your life who may not be the most obvious one, who needs you to reach out to them now and check that they're okay and put your arms around them, figuratively or literally, and let them know that they're awesome to do that. But I just see in young men a real willingness to move forward. It's a difficult time. They don't want to go back. They want their sisters to have the same opportunities as them. They do not want to be pathologized for being men. They are trying to find their way forward, and I think they're going to. The only question is, are we going to help them? Do we have their backs as they make their way forward through this world, or are we going to keep blaming them? We have had way too many years of wagging fingers at young men rather than helping hands. They're awesome. They're on the right track. They just need our help. So for the love of God, let's give it to them.
Thank you. Let's show appreciation to Richard Reeves. And I understand your book, and you're going to sign books somewhere. And
once I've signed them, you can't send them back, so I'll sign all of them.
Thank you all for being here for some great questions tonight.